Yeah. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of my podcast, Ruminations with Ohiro Oni-Eseleh. Hello, everyone, and today I have a very special guest, Dr. Patrick Taylor. And it is my pleasure to introduce you as doctor. I know that you just got your doctorate this week, and
hmm
I am just as delighted as you are because I know that there are many more great things that you're going to be doing.
hmm
Looking forward to all of them. Dr. Patrick Taylor just got his doctorate of social work, DSW degree, from the University of Southern California. He's a licensed clinical social worker and a veteran of the United States Air Force. Thank you for your service, Doctor.
Thank you.
His story is rooted in frustration. I know that sounds a bit odd, but here is the deal. Despite social work's immense potential to address society's biggest challenges, the profession has been systematically funneled into clinical roles. But those of us who've been in social work practice for a very long time know that this is a fact, and that's the source of frustration for Dr. Taylor. His own journey reflects imbalance. He was drawn to social work by the promise of systemic change, but found himself steered into clinical practice, graduating without the macro training that he had hoped for. 7 years later, now even more, he carries the weight of that gap, not as a personal failing, but as evidence of a decades-old pattern in social work education. That experience drives his mission, which is to dismantle the micro pipeline in social work practice and to build new pathways that prepare and empower social workers to lead change at the systems level. Through macro pathways, which he funded, Dr. Taylor is advancing the grand challenge of, quote, creating social responses to a changing environment. He envisions a profession where social workers are not just responders, but proactive shapers of policy, community, and organizational systems. His purpose is clear. It is to equip social workers with the tools, confidence, and opportunities they need to reclaim the profession's true identity as a force for systemic change. Dr. Taylor, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Perhaps you can't see, but on purpose, I decided to wear a t-shirt that says that social work is a career
hmm
that changes everything.
I
Social
agree.
workers don't really walk around with that level of hubris, but I think that the way that I look at it is that social workers can actually make significant changes so that at the micro, meso, and macro levels. And so the challenge that you bring to the table today is simply to address the question if social work can actually do all of that. And
hmm
that is why is it that social work education, especially in the United States, continues to funnel students in the direction of clinical work. But I think I must say from the outset that you have nothing against micro practice. You have nothing against clinical practice because
Right.
yourself, the licensed clinical social worker.
hmm
So I will ask you two questions. Number one, is there anything that I left out in your introduction and you can fill the gaps? And number two, how did your experience in direct clinical practice shape your interest in macro social work?
to answer the first question, no, you did great. I think that's a very accurate description of me and my work. Um, I would say for the second question, I wouldn't say that my clinical experience had a direct impact. I think uh, I have always had an orientation, a wiring to see the bigger picture. I was drawn to the career field, like you mentioned, with the promise of addressing systemic change. In my education, I saw that there was such a strong pull towards clinical that I developed a misconception that this was where I had to go first in order to advance into macro. I needed to do the micro first. Um, it wasn't until 8 years later and me still, through that whole time, just pursuing macro practice, but not really finding any clear avenues. Um, and then I joined my doctorate program, learned a lot about different things that I wish I learned in my master's program that helped me make more intentional steps into the macro space. Micro practice has served me in a lot of ways. It just has not contributed to that macro orientation. Uh, my micro experience and everything that I've done in client-facing work has only reinforced itself. Uh, to get on to the track of, uh, you know, uh, pursuing the licensure and pursuing the different experiences in the different spaces, never seemed to catapult me to the systems level work that I wanted to do. Um, so I wouldn't say that it informed my macro interest or practice, but it definitely did show me the pipeline. It showed me the systemic structure that kept me in place, that was working as a barrier to macro practice.
So would you say that in some respects, the profession of social work has veered away from its historical roots?
Well, it definitely has, and it's not I mean, I say it all the time. It's definitely a systemic issue. It's not. No one's behind the curtains, pulling the strings or anything like that. There's no bad guy. But looking all the way back, about 100 years to how we started chasing legitimacy in the form of the medical model, and then leaning heavily into that legitimacy over the years, has diluted the macro presence within the profession. It still exists, but it's siloed, and it's largely unsupported by the organizations that uh, are supposed to support all of social work, right? There's very little incentive to go into macro practice, and very little knowledge on how to translate, the skills that we learn, the generalist skills that we learn into those spaces.
I must tell you that I am really happy that you're doing this. Like you, I'm a clinician. I'm also an academic. And I will tell you, and I don't think it's news to you, that when students come to graduate school, the very first day they come to orientation, and I ask them, what do you want to do with your degree when you get your graduate degree? What are your plans? Nearly everybody talks about having a clinical practice. So there is this push-pull that does exist, right? There is this push to get out there into practice. Part of it is because the thought is if you do that, then that's how you can make a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is also the pull, I would say, that rests on the conscience of the individual, especially the individual. And you can tell me if you wrestle with that, or if you did wrestle with that. The individual, that pull that says to you, I said rests on your conscience because you understand the history of social work.
Mm-hmm.
Then you say to yourself, if I go this route completely, will I be selling off to the capitalism that drives everyone almost in that direction, just so they can make money to do what?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I see what you're saying for sure, and I think that it's important to understand how intractable the issue is, right? Um, there was a time where I thought it would, we could simply resolve this by uh, changing the curriculum. But in my research and in my connections and networking, I learned that it's a multi-level issue. Take the job market, for instance. A lot of the curriculum that's built is in relation to the job market for where they want social work, right? There's a shortage of mental health professionals, and so social work seems to be the answer to filling those gaps. Um, then there's the licensure for legitimacy. That's more of a how the job market views us as legitimate social workers. Even if you're not even in a clinical space, that's our mark of legitimacy in the career field. That's problematic in itself as well. Not having a macro licensure or another type of uh, licensure that helps promote the macro practice aspect of the profession. Um, then you have to look at who we draw into these programs. I wrote a piece that said social work is not psychology light, and the idea behind it is we're drawing in people who simply want to get into therapy, um, and the way the curriculum is built and the way the system works, it's providing that avenue for them. It's not deterring them. It's not saying that maybe you should consider all of this, and then they graduate with imposter syndrome, not feeling like they're fully equipped. But that's because our education is supposed to cover all three levels, micro, meso, macro, and we're not as concentrated as, say, a LPC or a psychology degree. So I think it's just really important to see how intractable it is, and there is no real, if we solve this one part, it'll resolve all of it.
Right. If you don't mind just sharing a little bit, I mean, there are two things that I want to know. Number one, you were in the US Air Force. And if you could share that part of your experience in the military that influenced, if any, that influenced you into becoming a social worker and how you have used your military experience in social work practice.
Um, I get to be quite frank and somewhat vulnerable. So I grew up in a very hyper masculine type of family. You don't it's a vulnerability to be emotional. It's a vulnerability to show weakness. Um, all of that tied into being a very closed off individual who can try to do everything on his own. Very anti mental health type of situation. Joining the military did not help that. It's more of the same. They reinforce the idea that seeking help can be problematic. The military has an entire history of help seekers being punished for seeking help in different ways. Um, I am one of those cautionary tales. There was a time where my mental health took a dip, and I decided to seek mental health, and that was my first interaction with a social worker. Um, I went in there and she made me angry because she challenged my thinking, and being a quote unquote man, I didn't appreciate that. And then I left and I felt very exposed. I was planning on not going back at all, but she did a good job of angering me, and I wanted to go back and argue with her. So to this day, she has been my uh, favorite therapist because she challenged my thinking, and she did a good job of sitting in it with me, even though I was argumentative. And it helped shift a lot of my perspective around mental health and stuff like that. So that was my introduction to social work. I wanted to then commission as a social worker in the military, but I was kind of stonewalled. my leadership saw that I was in mental health, and because I was in mental health, they determined that I wasn't a good fit for officer position in the military. That's just it's a very mild consequence, but it's still a consequence to seek help seeking. Basically, you get kind of punished if you are in need of some type of mental health support. But me being me, I decided that I am just going to find a way around this wall, and I decided to separate and go and get my education as a civilian. I attended Hawaii Pacific University to get my MSW, and it's, you know, ever since then, I've just hit the ground running, trying to make sure that I get into a space within social work that I really, truly wanted to do. And to be clear, I did have a misconception. I thought social work was about CPS or taking children away. um, but they told me, a psychologist told me to talk to a social worker and do some research. And I found out all the things you can do. And that excited me because I wanted to do so much. Um, and that's what drew me to the profession.
Right. So considering that military background, the experience you just shared, and really what happens in and outside of the military, I am wondering if there are any factors from that experience that would say mostly influenced your decision to move beyond individual practice to the leadership, and if you've been thinking about policy, administration, or community level work.
Yeah. I would say, again, I think my motivation behind my career trajectory up until this point, all the client facing work I've done and the client facing work I still do. I currently am a civilian employee with the DoD, and I support military police. And I see a lot of what I experienced in them. And I try to be a force against that. And what drew me to the program that I'm currently working with is that I got to build it. I got to build it from the ground up. And I've always, again, been a big picture type of person. And so I'm very protective of the program, very protective of my service members that I serve. And I try to, what I tried to do over the last 3 years was build a help-seeking culture. It did not affect any policy. In fact, affecting policy within the DoD is uh, pretty difficult. So my goal always is to what's the path of least resistance? Where can I be the most effective? And building that help-seeking culture within the unit. And in so fact, within the other units of the other providers that were embedded as well, um, it helped change the dynamic on this station that I'm at. It helped change how people view help seeking and mental health. And it's very important at this particular base because there's an air of perfection. Like you can't mess up. If you do mess up, it can mean the lives of many people. And so they lean into perfectionism, which leads into feeling overwhelmed, not good enough, feeling like a burden, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so that's my macro approach within this particular client-facing job that I'm doing, making sure that I'm touching culture. And I think that's important to understand too, because macro practice isn't just changing policy or organizational leadership. If you can touch culture, if you can touch communities, that's macro practice, and you can do that from the confines of your office.
Let me, I think it is the stories that we tell sometimes that move people and help people to understand better the humanity of and in what we do. I just got this message from Africa. I believe it's from Nigeria. It says, I am watching and his story is quite touching. And so I will just, do you have anything? Well, You just defended your doctoral research. So I'm not going to tell you to defend it again. But I'm just wondering if there's anything there. I'm not sure what it was on. I'm assuming it's related to what you're discussing, but whether or not, I'm wondering if there's anything there that you can share that so that people who are watching us, including those who are not social workers, can take something away from.
Um, I would say there's a lot I could talk about. I guess one thing to take away is um, if I recall writing an op-ed um, about a specific vulnerable population in a policy class. And my teacher at the time asked me if I wanted to publish it. And I said, yes, of course. And he told me, like, make sure you're sure because if you put this out there, they're going to know that this is what you stand for and you gotta have to pick your battles and this, that, and the other. I made it a point, and this is just who I am as a person. I made it a point to make sure that I pick all the battles. I don't care. I'm going to fight for what I believe in. And I think it's important that you stand for something because if you don't, you'll fall for anything. And there's a lot going on, especially in the US right now, regarding uh, you know, fake news or misinformation or, you know, just societal influence as a whole that's generating a lot of hate. Um, but I think that's one of the main takeaways is to fight for what you believe in. You'd be surprised uh, who's going to be there to support you, and who's going to be there to help amplify your message or give you that platform. Um, the next thing I would say is, you know, there's always another option. And right now, I'm talking, it's important to know that I'm the type of person who catastrophizes. So if something doesn't go my way, I will sit there in a big old puddle of anxiety and catastrophize. Um, but then after a good night's sleep, I then start, you know, considering my options. Like, what are my options? Is there a way around this? Is there a way through this? Um, does it just require me to fight a little bit more? And I've learned that if you put in the effort, if you don't let your motivation wane, and if you are able to gain that momentum, you will do great things. It might not be exactly what you wanted, but it success doesn't it rarely looks like the plan that we have for ourselves. It's important to look at other options and other avenues of success as well, um, because that's probably where you're going to be the most successful.
Someone just wrote that your message said the message inspires one to stand and own what they believe. And that actually, I think, encapsulates really where we started, right? Which your move. It's not a move, but your focus now on macro social work. It is what you believe. You're standing on it and you're pushing it and you're making a difference that's going to be bigger and bigger and bigger. And while that is the case, I am going to ask if you can give me an idea of what you think are the misconceptions that exist about macro practice that discourage people from focusing on macro practice as we all ought to.
Yeah, so many misconceptions. I think one of the most prominent misconceptions that I have been focused on is in regards to career viability and security and return of investment. Take, for instance, if in the US, if you want to get your clinical license, you have to graduate from your MSW. You may have student loans. You have to put in the supervision hours. Hopefully, you get that for free, but you typically have to pay for that too. You have to test. Hopefully, you pass it on the first try. If you don't, then you'll be paying for that again. um, and the idea is in 5 to 7 years, you might get your LCSW, and you still do not qualify, or you're still not competitive enough for a lot of the higher paying roles because you don't have 2 years post LCSW experience and you can't provide supervision. So now you need even more experience and more time. And by the time you get there in the US, averages about 60K a year for social workers, which is after a master's degree in 7 years is not a whole lot of money. But if you look at policy analyst only requires a 4 year degree. So if you have your BSW, that's enough. And maybe a year or two of policy experience. And that can be you engaging in policy within your own workplace. That could be you doing policy briefs on your own. It could be a lot of different things that help you develop the skill set that you need to fit in those spaces. And then it's just a matter of translating our language, the social work language, into uh, uh, language that fits more into the policy realm when you're applying and trying to match your CV to their KSAs and stuff like that. Um, that is probably the biggest misconception is that the clinical track is the place for job security and that's the place where the money is. There was a time I would have agreed for the job security, but in the today, not so much. Social workers are being laid off left and right. DEI programs are being shut down. MSW programs are being shut down. Language is being constrained and is deterring people who care very much about this profession. There's a lot that's happening that's affecting that that idea of job security that once existed that I would have agreed with maybe 5, 10 years ago. Um, but the viability, the job viability, the ROI, the financial uh, equitability of the clinical track just doesn't stand up against the macro. Um, in macro spaces, we have social workers that are making 6 figures, and 6 figure social workers are few and far between. Um, a very small percentage of our profession make it to that point. Um, I think that there's other misconceptions too, but that's probably the main one I focus on because I think what I'm learning is the newer generation of social workers are very much focused on return of investment, and I'm so happy to see it because it's very progressive and it's anti, martyrdom as a badge of honor. Uh, it's important to understand that you know, uh, poverty is no virtue and wealth is no sin.
Can you say that again?
Poverty is no virtue and wealth is no sin.
Thank you. And you just talked about the generation that I think one person represents here who just sent a question. And so I asked you to repeat that because I think it's something that she and people in her group would like to hear. And for me too, of course. She wrote, as someone who is interested in macro practice, what practical experiences should aspiring macro social workers pursue while they're still students?
There's a lot of things you can do. I think community organizing is one of the more practical things that our new generation of social workers can do, just because of the power of social media, the power of networking, the power of, and the accessibility of connecting with different individuals around the world. Community organizing has never been easier. You can be a content creator, developing community around that and that could be your platform that you springboard off of to whatever macro track you want to go to. Community organizing is just the easiest, but there's many different avenues you can take. I would say if you're in school and if you have the opportunity, there look for electives that help serve whatever your professional or career goal is. Um, I would say make sure to voice your wants, voice your career goals to your professors, and to anybody who will listen, because you will never know the resources that are out there for you until you speak up. Um, those are the two main things I would say.
Beautiful. So, how do you think, as someone who is in academia, and I still practice, of course, as you know, but how can schools of social work better integrate macro competencies into clinical education so that students view both practice areas, that is in micro and macro, as complementary rather than separate?
That is probably the most difficult thing to answer because, again, it's so multifaceted. In order to do that, one, I think there is a cultural issue, right? There's a delineation between micro and macro, and meso in the professional realm doesn't even seem to exist. It's just micro or macro. Um, then I think that delineation creates a us and them type of dynamic, and that that in itself needs to be dissolved. We are all social workers, and you know, uh, we're all called to not just address the individual need, but to address the systemic injustice as well. And I think that we have a misconception that we think we have to have full capacity in either micro or macro to be effective. And I don't think that's necessarily true. Like I said, I'm in clinical practice now, but I'm still able to engage in macro practice in different ways. Um, and I'm moving and transitioning to a fuller capacity of macro practice, but I'll still be very much capable of client-facing work, and most likely will engage in that continuously as I move along. I think that it's just it's very important to understand that there's no single answer that could resolve the curriculum issue. CSWE has accreditation standards that are very lax, which it's a double-edged sword because it is a benefit to an extent where you can build your curriculum up how you would like, essentially. But again, the curriculum and these universities and these programs are basing their curriculum off of the job market and off of demand. If student demand is clinical practice, if the job market is clinical clinicians or providers, then that's not going to change. Um, so I think it's important that we find a way to address the this issue from a most multifaceted aspect. And I keep harping on it. I think culture is one of the biggest things that we need to address.
Yeah, I like the fact that you just said you are a clinician, you are engaged in clinical practice while also doing macro practice. And so I would ask, because I'm sure that many social workers who are watching you from around the world would want to know, because there are thoughts going through their minds as well. So what skills have you found, that are developed in micro practice that you have found to also be most transferable to successful macro social work practice?
I would say probably the clearest example would be solution-focused brief therapy. I've always been a solution-focused type of individual, so I resonate a lot with that therapeutic approach. Um, Solution focus is a way to you identify the problem, but you don't sit with the problem. You start looking at what will it look like if it's resolved, and how do we get there in increments. And I think that is something that I was able to leverage in the macro space because in the macro space you do the same thing. You identify a problem, but you don't sit with the problem. You start talking about what would it look like if this problem is resolved, And then you start working from, instead of going to A to Z, you start from A to B. What's the next step? What are the steps, the baby steps I need to make right now to get to that point of resolution? Um, and it's helped me in the way I think and the way I'm wired to address things systematically. So I think that's probably the clearest example of transferability. But there's so many different things. If you've done case management, if you've done resource aggregation, if you've done uh, uh, policy review within your own organization, just to understand your own job and your own responsibilities, all of those are transferable into the macro space.
Right. So since that is the case, and perhaps a lot of clinicians are not thinking like that, but based on what you've just described, what barriers would you say then prevent practicing clinicians from pursuing macro careers?
And culture, mostly. Some of the barriers come in the form of influence. There are professors out there, there are senior social workers out there, professionals, all influencing our young social workers to take a particular path. I'm speaking from experience, so I do apologize if anybody's offended by that, but it's true that we're not promoting social work as a whole, right? We promote the clinical path more than anything. We promote uh, the clinical path as the only viable path, the only one that's going to give you that job security and give you that pay. So again, culture is the biggest barrier. Other barriers include, location. It can include the quality of education. No two programs are built the same. Um, there are programs out there with very robust macro tracks that have macro teachers and more macro placements than they have students. I think it's important to seek those universities out and do your research, but not every university has that. So it's important to know that no two social work programs are the same. Um, I think another barrier is um, just not having the choice. I was at the end of my oral defense, one of my committee members suggested that I work further upstream and start reaching out to high school students and educate them on what social work is and what social work can be. And it makes sense because right now, people who come into their MSW program already have an idea of what they want to do. We need to have a bigger presence in the younger generations. We need to have a bigger presence in media and culture and marketing in general, because the profession, I believe, has a bit of an identity crisis, and that can work as a barrier as well.
Thank you very much. So I'm wondering what the role of supervision is or can be in all of this, supervision and mentorship. Um, so what do you think those can do, mentorship and supervision, to reduce the barriers that you have been talking about and
Yeah.
encourage make education happen effectively?
Mentorship in particular will play a huge role, right? One of one of my hopes is to one day put together a mentorship pool full of individuals who have made it into the macro space because they have lived experience and they know what it takes to get into those spaces. And no two stories are the same. So one mentor can tell you one thing and another mentor can tell you another, and it'll be two different paths to the same goal. I think it's important that we do have more people in the macro space stepping up to provide mentorship, even in a unofficial or a more casual capacity. I don't think it needs to be in an official capacity. I just think that we need to educate them so that they understand that there's choice, and that's the one thing that's missing from uh, the the culture for the early student, right? They don't know there's choice. And or at least there's an illusion of it. They don't know everything that's available to them, and so they can't make a clear, informed choice. Mentorship, I think, can definitely solve that. Practicum placements that are macro focused could definitely change that. Supervision, much like mentorship, can help change that. Um, and I think that even professional organizations can help change that by first understanding what it is a social worker truly does, and not living within this mass misconception of what social work is. And once we are able to establish that, I think that we will have a foothold in those spaces, um, where we can be effective and we can show that we're not just clinicians, we are also system level workers, system level thinkers.
So I love stories, and because stories do move, they move me, and I consider myself a storyteller. So I'm just wondering then, if you think back over maybe over the last few years, can you think of a time when your clinical experience directly informed a policy decision, an organizational change, affected your advocacy effort, um, your involvement in systems level change?
Yeah, I think probably the most recent. Uh, Again, I'm out here picking fights all the time, so there's a lot. But my most recent is in my current occupation. Like I said, when I came into this job, the program was in its infancy, and I got to build it from the ground up. And I did everyone loved what I was doing as far as what I was building and all the guides and trying to make sure that everybody in the program was self-sufficient, all the providers were self-sufficient so that we didn't have to rely on, different resources to support us. Um, but then I always make sure everywhere I go to learn the policy of my job, because it keeps you in your lane and it makes sure you don't step on anybody else's feet. And it's, it's the legal requirement for your job, basically. And I learned that the mental health clinic at my location wanted us to essentially be mental health providers within the unit, and that's not the nature of our job. Our job is not clinical in nature. It's only about 25% clinical, and 75% is non-clinical. It's about skill building, building resilience, outreach, um, pretty much just engaging with our members and help building rapport and that comfortability with help seeking, basically. Um, I brought it to their attention because they brought up their policy, and I that led me to believe that they did not know our policy. So we had a meeting. I went over our policy with them. They disagreed with how the policy was interpreted, which wasn't up for interpretation. It was very clear. Um, but it was during that time that I decided to stand and fight, and I told them we can advance this as far as you want to go. I was willing to talk to the base commander with them. Uh, I will say it did not go anywhere because they did not have a leg to stand on. This is why I love policy, because it dictates how you're supposed to operate and how you're supposed to move. And that is the best grounding, the best foundation for anything. If you're going to fight something, is to utilize policy.
Right. So now I'm going to ask you to do something practical for all of us. So if you were designing a micro to macro pipeline initiative, what key components will it include to successfully prepare clinicians for macro work?
Um, I will say so. During my doctoral program, we did run a prototype workshop, intensive workshop, where we uh, helped individuals understand the landscape of macro practice, understand how to transfer their skills into macro roles, and how to build up the confidence to engage with and approach macro positions and jobs. It was largely successful and well received, which informed macro pathways. Macro pathways now is building off of that, and is currently an LLC. It will be building a membership platform that will have presentations, workshops. Again, I want to build a mentorship pool. I want to make sure that there is a lot of return of investment through this platform that's going to help individuals transfer from clinical to macro if there's an interest to do so. Um, Super important that I make sure everyone knows that this isn't anti-clinical. It's just pro-balance, and that's all I care about is balancing the profession. Um, I think that's going to be the start, but as we go along, I definitely have plans for a nonprofit arm, a 501c3, a 501c4 policy arm. I want to make sure that we engage in political talks and lobbying as well, to address things like licensure, macro licensure, or title protection, and all this other stuff that comes with why we have such a huge identity issue right now. Um, I want to also lead by example. At some point, I want to be able to hire social workers, and I want to hire them with equitable pay. I don't. I imagine, a social worker that graduated with their MSW that comes to work for me doesn't have to wait 7 years to make 60K. Um, I imagine a profession that pays them 60K right out the gate because they have the credentials already with their degree. Um, I think that by leading by example in that way will show the world that it's possible, that this exists, so it can exist elsewhere as well. And the hope is to branch out, become the national hub for macro practice support and development. Um, Very ambitious goals with this project for sure, but all of it to make sure that not only the people who are interested in macro from the education point, but also those who are um, deep into the clinical point and cannot see the avenue, right? Because I'm a representative of you, and you're a representative of me. Um, and I think it's important that we have that avenue. We got into social work because among other things, it was a flexible degree that allowed us to do anything. But what people don't tell you is once you choose your path and start investing in your path, it becomes that much more difficult uh, to kind of invest in that flexibility.
I am so grateful that you agreed to take at least 1 hour of your time on a Saturday. And I'm sure, I don't know what the weather is like where you are. You're in Louisiana, so it's probably quite a warm day, as most days are in Louisiana. And
Mhm.
but you agreed to give up that time and sacrifice it to talk about this with us. And I'm excited about the prospects of the project, macro pathways. And I am really looking forward to being as supportive and helpful in it as you would like me to be, because I do believe in the work that you're doing. And I am encouraged to know that there are social work students like the one who wrote to us that are seriously thinking about macro work at a
Awesome.
time many others only want to do clinical work. So, do you have any parting words for us?
Parting words. I would say look out for macro pathways. We're only gaining momentum. We're going to continue to grow. If there is a way for us to support you, I hope that you engage with us and connect with us. In the meantime, if you just want to learn more about the work that I'm doing, I've written articles that are published on LinkedIn, and I constantly advocate for different things on LinkedIn and on social media in general. So following along would be appreciated as well. Um, I would also say if you are interested in macro, we don't have the clearest of paths right now. It is going to be a fight. So the best thing you could do is to network, connect with people who are already in those spaces, talk with people who are already in those spaces, and see what they can do to assist you um, in advancing your macro career path. Um,
So
yeah, that would be
I like to share your site with people, and anyone who would want to engage can also contact me to reach you, and also just go to the website and sign up. This is a really grand work, and as I said, I'm looking forward to all of the great things that you will do in the social work in the social work space. Well,
mhm.
once again, congratulations, Dr. Taylor.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us today. We'll be in touch.
All right.
All right. Have a great weekend.
You too.